We are recording this. Also, because this is webinar mode, I cannot hear any of you or see you. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat box. I'll probably hold off to answering those until the end of it, but feel free to drop them at any time throughout the presentation. So just a little bit about Gateway Greening. I don't know if all of the attendees are local in St. Louis, but Gateway Greening is based in St. Louis. We've been around since 1984, actually. I believe 83, but in 84 we were established as a 501c3 nonprofit. So our mission is to empower the community through community and school gardening. So we have over 200 gardens in our network within the St. Louis area. In order to become in our network, you have to be in St. Louis City or County. We also did just start extending into the metro east of Illinois. Of those 200 something gardens, about 80 of them are youth gardens. So I think 65 or so are school gardens and the rest are other youth gardens, rec centers and whatnot. We also have a land trust program, and we have 17 gardens that are currently in our land trust program. So again, our mission is to educate and empower people to strengthen the community through urban agriculture, and the focus on that is through gardening for the most part. So for our school program, basically what we do is if you are in our network area, you can come to contact us, go to our website and fill out a project interest form. And if you're interested in starting a garden, we will get back to you. You'll go through an orientation, and then we have a garden development process that you go through, and it's 4 phases. It's community, asset, community-based. And once you finish those 4 phases, we will help you to install a garden, and then you'll be considered in our network, and you'll get lots of resources from us for being in the network, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But basically then you can get volunteer groups sent to your school. Right now we have those on hold during the pandemic, but hopefully we can start that up again soon. You can also borrow tools from us for the garden. We also give out free seeds and seedlings to schools that are in our network. So you get 10 free seed packets each gardening season. So that includes spring, summer, and fall. And you also get a discount on seedlings. So we also offer workshops and professional development to schools that are in our network. So we like to do those in person. Right now, everything's virtual. We also have contests, which I'll talk a little bit more about later in the presentation, but we do one for the beginning of summer that is called First Piece to the Table. And we also do it in the fall, which is the Sweet Potato Challenge. And you can register for that through our website if you are one of our in-network gardens. We also do yearly site visits. Right now we're sending out surveys, but if you are a garden in our network, we will visit you or contact you annually just to see if there's any support that we can give, if there are any other resources that you need, and so on. So we like to check in with our gardens each year just to make sure they have the outreach that they need and they don't need any other resources from us. We also have a seed to stem curriculum, which you can find on our website. We've also, I have not included on here, but we have just started doing virtual videos. So if you go to Gateway Greening's YouTube page, you can find some of the seed to stem lessons kind of shortened in a video form, along with lots of other gardening resources. So the goals of this presentation basically are to help you understand what kind of plants would be good for growing in a youth garden, also to think about what your goals are and how that can impact your plan for when you're planting your garden, and also to help you discover gardening and planting practices that will maximize your production. Again, if you're just joining us and you have questions at any time throughout the presentation, please put them in the chat box and I will go to those at the end. So planting your school garden, how exciting. Often when people think of gardening, they think of maybe something that looks like this. This is actually our demonstration garden that we have off Bell Avenue. Something that, I mean, tends to be what you think of as a garden. It's kind of neat. This one's actually a little messy. But your garden, your school garden can look many different ways. So it doesn't have to look like the typical gardens you see in your neighborhood or the community. So when it comes to youth gardening, this is really what we like to see. Involve lots of different herbs, fun things. It can get messy. Sometimes I think people are a little intimidated to start a garden at their school because they don't feel like they have a green thumb, but that's part of the fun of school gardening. You can learn with the students, and it's really used as a learning tool or whatever your goal might be. So it doesn't have to be neat and tidy. Repurpose things. I've seen at some school gardens some really cool ideas for trellising. I've seen people use bike wheels for peas. There's so many different things. You can create your own, using string, of course, and bamboo. Find whatever you can use. That's part of the fun of it. And you can even incorporate that into a project with the students. But again, we really want to see, school gardens should be really hands-on and everyone getting in. They can look messy. So the first thing when you're thinking of planning your school garden, the first thing you want to think about is what is the goal of your garden? So if the goal of your garden is for food production, that's going to direct how you set your garden up. You're going to want to probably have, if you're trying to provide food for, the whole school community, parents, teachers, students, then you're probably going to want to have a large space and grow things that you'll get mass quantities of. If your goal is to teach garden skills or science experiments, think about how you'll set up the layout for that. You could incorporate square foot gardening, or you could have the students get involved in that and using string and measuring out the garden beds, and each kind of having their own square that they're using where they can kind of track progress. So just think about if that's something you would want to do and how that will direct your garden planning. If your goal is to explore natural processes, maybe teach about adaptation, pollination, then obviously you're going to want to have a lot of natives, herbs, things that are going to attract lots of pollinators and other critters to your space. Your goal might be something like art projects, which in that case, that should direct you to choose lots of different vegetables or herbs and flowers that could be used for art projects. So like beets and onions are good for using as dyes. You can also grow lots of colorful flowers that you could use for flower pounding or for doing leaf plant rubbings. So consider that when you're thinking of if your goal is for art projects. If maybe you want to do a quiet space for them to just come out and learn, so you might want to kind of separate things and have some seating that's separated around the garden. Or maybe your goal is just to engage the community. So consider first what your goal is and let that kind of direct how you plan your garden for the year. So again, grow to meet your goals. That should be your first step. So we're going to talk next a little bit about youth-friendly plant design, harvesting during the school year, and planning for multiple groups and summer maintenance. So when it comes to youth garden design, it's just something you want to make sure you consider because these are small people that will be working in the garden. So putting up something like chicken wire to keep rabbits out might not be the best idea because you're going to have little ones in the garden and that's also going to keep them from being able to get into the garden. So really think about youth design. If you maybe have someone that, if you have students that you'll need wheelchair access for, then a double high bed could be good. Otherwise, we'd usually recommend a single high bed. If you have very small children that will be using the garden. Also think about I just lost my train of thought with that one. So just think about making it accessible for small children. When you're thinking about nails or things that might be coming out of the boards, keep an eye on that. Any kind of infrastructure you're putting in, you want it to be safe and accessible. And if you do have a problem with pests like rabbits, something you can't put chicken wire in because it will keep the students out, you can use that as a project learning experience. I have experienced that at a school garden that I work with where the rabbits were coming in eating everything in the garden. So we took it as a learning moment. Again, having a garden in general should be kind of trial and error, but especially when it's with students, It's okay if things are getting eaten and you have pests. Use that as something else to explore and research. Give students opportunities to come up with other ways that they can keep pests out of the garden. So when you're thinking of youth-friendly plants, there are lots of different plants that you can incorporate that are a little more youth-friendly. So first, you want to think about plants that you'll be able to harvest during the school year. So if you're planting a bunch of summer crops that won't still be around in the fall, then you have to think about how are those getting harvested and how are they getting, how are they being given out to the community or to school families. So it's probably best to do a lot of spring cool weather crops and think about fall cool weather crops and maybe some summer crops that will still be producing a harvest when the students come back in the fall. So when I say cool weather crops, that's things like greens, a lot of root veggies. So one of my favorite things to grow with students is radishes because they're small, they grow really quickly, and they're pretty fail-proof. So if you're completely new to school gardening, radishes are a great way to start. The kids love to see them and they can pluck them out and eat them. Yeah, greens, anything that you can kind of like put in a salad is great too, because then you can harvest all of that by the end of the school year and do a salad harvest party. So also think about what your students want to eat. You might really like eggplant, but if most of your students aren't into eggplant or have never eaten it, it might not be something you want to grow. Again, it depends on what the goal is of your garden. So engage families too. It's a good idea if you have a very diverse population of students to reach out to the family or whoever is going to be eating the produce. Maybe there are things, you know, they eat at home that we don't typically grow in a garden, but can be grown in our region. So reach out, get feedback. There are lots of different diverse crops that you can grow that you might not think can grow in St. Louis, but they actually can. And I do have a document on that, some different cultural beds that you could grow if you want to experiment with growing crops from different areas, different regions around the world, and you're not sure what really grows in St. Louis. I will give you the email at the end of this presentation and you can email me and I will send that out. So also think about what's kid-friendly harvesting. So again, little things that kids can easily harvest, maybe pluck off a vine. Small vegetables or fruits are always great, strawberries, cherry tomatoes, things that are easy for kids to harvest and also to process or eat. If it's something that is really going to involve a lot of cooking and you don't have access to that, then consider that. Think about varieties that are familiar to them, so something they may be used to eating at home, but also things that are really fun and different. So you could create a sensory garden and put things with lots of just really weird shapes and colors. Even if maybe they're not going to eat them, it could be a fun way for them to engage physically, you know, by touching them, but also using their sense. So also think about the edible parts as a whole and just the different flavors in crops. Having radishes are fun because a lot of students haven't had a radish if they're very young and they get surprised by the spiciness. I have found horseradish is also very fun to grow in gardens because when you're processing it, you can kind of eat a little bit of it without actually adding all the other parts of making horseradish. And students get really shocked by that spice. I love to grow spicy stuff, even though I have a sweet and not spicy. You don't want very spicy. You don't probably want to have jalapenos in your school garden if that's something a student may find and pluck off and go to eat. But stuff like mustard greens that have a little spice, those are always really fun to grow with students. So again, just thinking of different youth-friendly plants, I mentioned a couple of things like beets are great if you're going to use them for dyes or even just to eat or pickle. Sweet potatoes are super fun, and we'll talk more about that with our sweet potato challenge contest. But it's just a really fun crop to grow. A lot of students don't realize that the sweet potatoes they eat at home come from under, the part they're eating is actually under the ground. Small things, again, like radishes, tomatoes, strawberries, things they can easily just pluck off and eat when they're out there after they clean them. Root veggies are always fun. It's exciting for kids to see a carrot growing, but they don't really know what's actually growing underneath or how big it has become or what color it might be until they get to harvest it and pull it out of the ground. Small things like peas and beans are a lot of fun with students. You think about things too that if your goal is to really use the food to eat, then you want to maximize your production. You're probably going to want to grow things that are smaller, that don't take up a lot of space, you'll get more of. So that way you have more of that to distribute to the families or students. Pumpkins are also a really fun one. We do an activity called the pumpkin graveyard. So you can grow pumpkins and then the students can turn them into jack-o'-lanterns, or even if they just have their own jack-o'-lanterns at home, you can bring them, once they're kind of done and starting to decompose, you can have an empty bed that you throw all those in, and the students can watch over time as the pumpkins decompose. And then in the spring or some more so early summer, they'll start to see the seeds that have decomposed just naturally start new pumpkin plants. So that's a really fun way to show plant life cycles and just learn about decomposition. Garlic's also a fun one to kind of show like overwintering, because they plant them in the winter in the late fall and then cover the beds, and then they get to actually harvest it in the summer. So that's a fun one to do too. So when you're kind of setting up your garden at your school or your rec center, wherever you might be doing this at, it's a good idea to have a garden bulletin board. So this kind of just keeps people reminded about the garden and helps to engage people with the garden. So if you have a bulletin board somewhere like outside the main office, somewhere that people will see and pass by a lot, there's a lot of different things you can include on that. So you can include a planting calendar. So Gateway Greening actually has one on our website. You can find that. So it's Gateway Greening's vegetable planting calendar, and that just shows what months, if you're in the St. Louis region, what months it's a good time to start seeds indoors, start seeds outdoors, plant seedlings, all of those good things. So also think of maybe putting a map above your garden. If you're going to have visitors that are going to help out in the garden during the school year, or you could even have a map outside for summer maintenance help. That's a great idea, but you might want to create a map and actually number each bed and maybe put what is in each bed. So that way people just have a better idea kind of like how to maintain that. A lot of times I know I've seen volunteers that come to help out in the summer. They just don't know what a weed is. And sometimes if you don't know what's planted there, you don't know what's safe to pull or not. So it's a good idea to have a map with some more information about that. You can also just put signs all over in the garden too for each bed. So you can also think about how you'll share the harvest. You might want to have something on your board for people to sign up. You know, if they're interested in some different produce. You could also have a sign-up sheet. So thinking about how the plants will be maintained over summer. That's probably the number one thing that we see with school gardens when they're not really a success, because no one's generally there in the summer. So you could think about asking maybe the maintenance man at the school to help out with that, since they tend to be there. Otherwise, we'll talk in just a minute about some other ideas you can do to kind of help come up with a maintenance plan. But that's one of the first things you really want to think about if you're going to start a school garden. So you can also think about like designating different classroom beds. You could do maybe each class gets a bed, each grade gets a bed, maybe the garden, you know, it's a community garden for the whole school where everyone's kind of helping out. But just think about what everyone wants to grow and how they're going to be used. So back to the maintenance plans, if you go through our garden development process in order to get the grant so we can help you start a garden at your school, you have to have a pretty detailed maintenance plan. So again, that's just showing how you're going to take care of the plants in the summer. You really want to think about, do you have easy water access? If your water needs a key, is that something that can be left available for volunteers? You need to make sure that your garden is being maintained if you're going to grow over summer. So we actually have a video on our YouTube page, and one really good idea is to have a bucket, to create a bucket for your garden that's just for maintenance. So you might have a hand trowel in there, along with, if you need a water access key, you could put that in there, maybe some garden gloves. You could do some laminated signs of like what's a weed and what's not a weed. Any information that you would want a volunteer, you know, or a staff member that's going to help maintain the garden over the summer, anything they can need, you could put in that bucket so it's easily accessible. Another successful way we've seen schools kind of regulate maintenance is by creating some kind of sign-up sheet. So you could do something like, I'm trying to think of the name of the one now. Any kind of online sign-up sheet you can use where parents or staff members or community members, neighbors can sign up. Sign Up Genius, that's what I'm thinking of. You can create you can put information about the garden, so how things should be weeded, how often they should be watered. And you can have each week of the summer that no one will be in the building, and you can ask parents or volunteers, again, anyone, to sign up just to take a week. So that way it's not a heavy obligation on that person for that week. They only need to go by the garden 2 or 3 times, but it's an easy way to kind of make sure the garden is maintained for the summer. All right, just a minute here. Okay, oops, back too far. So some other things to think about are how you want to do your planting. So succession planting, these are different. Succession of planting is different methods that will help you to kind of maximize production. So we know with school gardens, like we were just talking, summer is when you really get so much of that harvest. So you want to try to grow as much as you can, the time students are there. So there are lots of different forms of succession planting that you can look up online. One example of this would just be planting, as soon as you harvest something, you immediately plant it again. So things that don't take a whole lot of time to harvest, like greens or radishes, as soon as you're pulling that up or finishing harvesting that plant, then you immediately will plant a new one. Or you could even do it where you're kind of spacing it out and doing it in intervals. So maybe you plant radish seeds 1 week and then you wait 2 weeks and plant another. So that way you kind of constant production, constant veggies to harvest. You can also think about crop rotation. So this is important when gardening, or really if you want to add nutrients and help with combat pests and increase soil health. So there are lots of different methods people have on crop rotation. We like to kind of go with the easy one to remember. So if you've had maybe legumes planted in a bed 1 year, the next year maybe switch to root, some kind of root vegetable. After that, you could switch to a fruit, and then from there, like a leafy vegetable. So think about what part of the plant you're going to harvest. And that's just an easy method for crop rotation, again, to help with soil health and pests. So another thing to think about when you're planting your school garden is if you want to do cover crops. So cover crops are planted in the off seasons, and they help to increase soil health again. So there are spring cover crops and there are also fall cover crops. Some examples of these are things like rye and vetch and barley. And you can purchase these all through the Gateway Greening store, which I'll talk about at the end. Excuse me. But yeah, again, cover crops just add to the soil health and kind of prevent erosion on the off seasons of growing. And they're really easy. You can just, after you grow them, you can just plow them over into the soil and turn that soil over. You can also try companion planting. I have not done a whole lot of companion planting, but that's just finding different vegetables, fruits that really grow well together. I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard of like the Three Sisters garden, Native American technique, where you're growing corn and beans and squash, and they're all kind of, you're using the corn to support the beans and so on. So you can think about what crops will do well together as far as for nutrients, or not stealing nutrients from each other, or also just how you can really kind of fit them in together and they can grow off one another. So when you're thinking of season extension, if you want to grow longer in the year, you want to probably consider both hard freezing and your first frost. So the first frost, or the light frost, is usually 29 to 32 to 29 degrees. And this will kill off very tender plants. You'll have still a lot of hardy plants that can make it through that first frost. Things like kale, cabbage sometimes, they can easily survive through that first frost. A hard freeze is 28 degrees and lower, and that will kill off most everything. So consider that when you're thinking of when's a good time to harvest, or if you want to add any kind of row cover or something to extend the season. So also at the end of the year, at the end of the fall, right before you're getting to that frost, you're going to want to remove your diseased plants. So for overwintering, you want all of those disease plants removed so they don't add more diseases, I guess, for the soil or into the soil for the plants will be growing next year. Also think about what you want to mulch. So adding things like straw, leaf mulch, burlap, you can get really creative. I know St. Louis has a local coffee shop or a couple of them that will give away the burlap bags if you get there at the right time. There's also bike stores will generally give away the big bike boxes. Sometimes they sell them for like $5, but that's something you could also use. So think about different ways of mulching the beds, especially if you're growing something you're overwintering like garlic or onions. You can also think about cold frames. I mentioned using row cover. So row cover will extend your growing season. It's really just a light fabric. You can put a PVC pipe, something over the bed to create an arch and then drape that row cover over it. And that will help to hold some of the heat in. Well, you could even create a cold frame, get creative, use like old windows and frame. There are lots of different ways you could do that. Again, I mentioned overwintering root vegetables like garlic and your perennials too. So make sure you're mulching those and letting them sit over winter. You went too far? No, it's not quite working. So the next thing you're going to do is make your planting plan. This is the big fun part. Once you've set your goals and you know what you're growing for and what you want to grow, involve your students in actually making a plan for planting. So there are lots of different ways you can do this. It's a good idea to have like a big calendar up that students can see. Think about, you know, maybe when they want to do different things in the garden, but create a map of your garden for the students and let them kind of have fun with making their own planting plans, even if they're not all going to look the same and it might not be what you're doing in your garden. If you're teaching them, if your goal is to kind of teach them different gardening techniques, let them create their own. You could do this by getting old seed catalog magazines and letting them cut out different vegetables that they want to do and kind of just making their own plan based on what they've learned as far as when to grow what. You know, if you're thinking about cold weather crops, then give them the opportunity to kind of find cold weather crops and create a planting plan for what they're going to grow. Or if you're kind of teaching them about companion planting. So you can really incorporate that into a lesson. So just to kind of step back and really think about when you're doing all of this, when you're making your planting plan with the students, start with the very first step, as we mentioned before, should be what is your goal for the school garden? So write down in your planting plan, in your maybe big planting plan that's posted for your own school garden, what are your top 2 goals for the garden? So again, is it to grow crops that are good for art projects? Is it to have maximum production, to give out to the community? Is it for science experiments? Write down what your 2 goals are. So that way that's really kind of guiding you as you go with the rest of it and come up with what kind of plants you want to plant in your garden and what practices you want to use for the garden. I'm having problems with my keyboard today. Excuse me. Oh, goodness. So the next steps, now that you have kind of the first steps for your planting plan, the next things that we would suggest you do, again, if you're in the local St. Louis region or the Metro East, you can order seedlings through Gateway Greening. The orders are due March 22nd. I believe that opens up to the public. If you're an in-network garden, then you can order now through the pre-order that you should have been emailed. But if you're not in network and you're just a home gardener or just a different community garden or school garden that's not in our network, you can actually go starting February 23rd, I believe. Okay, skip some. Oh, it's not done here. You can go to our website, Gateway Greening. You'll go to the About tab, and underneath that is the Gateway Greening store, or you can just Google the Gateway Greening store, and you'll be able to find our store that has seed packets you can buy for very cheap, 25 cents a pack. You can buy seedlings once they're open. We have lots of different kind of safe pesticides, row cover, things like that. So you can put in an order. Generally, you could come to our store at our office on Washington Avenue any day of the week and pick that up. But since we are all working from home right now, we are doing seedling and seed packet pickup dates. So if you put in an order, you'll be emailed about what Saturday you can come pick those up. I think our next one right now is in March. So I mentioned our contest. One of our contests is First Piece to the Table, and registration is now open for that. So you can go to our website if you want to register for that. And it's really just kind of a fun way to engage students, or you can even do this at your own school just for fun. But basically it's a contest, and we have different categories as far as what school has the first piece that are harvested, who has the biggest harvest, who comes up with the most creative trellis. But these are kind of fun things you can do to engage students. So if you want to participate in that with us, you can sign up on our website now. We just distributed free pea seeds for that. If you do it next year, you can get free seeds from us to plant for that. But you can still sign up, plant your pea seeds in February, and then you'll receive some information about when to actually send in your results for that. And the winners get a sign, and participants also get a fun sign. It says First Piece to the Table winner, or First Piece to the Table participant, like 2021. So just kind of a fun thing to put up around your garden. We also have the sweet potato contest. So that the sign up for that will be in April. And if you sign up for that, you will get free sweet potato slips from us. Not sure this year how many, it depends how many we get. Usually you'll get about 10 to 20. You can always purchase more to plant in your garden. And then in December-ish, we usually open up the form to send in your results. So again, the same as the first peas, we have different categories that you can win for, but all participants will also get a nice sign that they can hang on their garden. So we have another workshop coming up. It is April 13th. That's creating culturally relevant learning in the garden. So the same way to sign up through Zoom or Facebook. However you found this one, you can sign up for that now. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Again, I'm Tanya Shear, and I run the school program. Generally, I would be teaching in schools. Hopefully we can start that again soon. We'll see if we can actually get back out there and working with the kiddos. But generally, I'm teaching science-based lessons and different gardening skills at different schools in the area. So there's my email. Again, this presentation is recorded, and you can always go back to it. And that's really all we have for this. I know I see that some questions have come in, so I'm going to take some time. If you have any questions or need me to clarify anything I talked about, drop them in the chat box or in the Q&A, and we'll take a little time to talk about those. Just a second. So it looks like, let's see, Lauren asked, what are the best methods for keeping caterpillars from eating your veggies? One thing that we use is BT. So I am more of an educator than I am a gardener. Of course, I do lots of gardening, but when it comes to all those little things, I am not always the best to answer these questions. But what I've used before when they were really eating all over the cabbage was BT, and it's natural. And it works pretty well. You can also, I believe, be wrong on this, I believe BT is only good for soft-bodied animal or a pest, so things like caterpillars, it would work. If they're hard-bodied, it wouldn't. You can also try neem oil. Again, with these things, remember, you're just going to have to reapply them fairly regularly, especially if you're getting a rain. And you can purchase, I believe, both of those at the Gateway Grading store. So if you want to learn more about it, you can go to our store site. Let's see, overview. Someone asked if I can give an overview of the garden expansion grants. So again, I know all of you that are joining may not be in the St. Louis area, but part of our process to, once you actually are in our network and you go through that 4-phase development process, you can then apply every single year to get an expansion. So with the expansion, you can get up to $1,000 in materials. We don't give out any money, but we'll give out materials. So you'll get kind of a budget sheet that shows how much you could get for a bed or for a picnic table. There are lots of different items. We give out tools. So there are lots of different things you can get through the expansion grant. You can also start an orchard at your school with our orchard expansion grant. So basically you fill out the app. If you need that, you can email me. We sent that out to most of the gardens that are in our network, and you do have to be in our network to do that. But once you fill out that application and submit it to us, someone will get back to you on that. It will probably be Jackson with Gateway Greening if it's a garden expansion, or Dean if it's an orchard expansion, and they will just help you out from there. If you're applying to start an orchard, Dean will need to come out and look at your property and make sure you have the right setup for that. But yeah, really it's just starting with filling out the application, submitting it to us, and then we'll get back to you and go from there. I hope that answered your question. Hold on, let me see what's all coming in. You can use chat or Q&A. Someone had asked. Michelle said, our school's green space has a lot of shade, so it's hard to know if edibles would grow there. Have you encountered this much in the area? I have seen gardens with lots of shade. And it really just kind of depends what you want to grow. I mean, think about things that don't need a whole lot of sunlight. So you can research different vegetables that will do good with low sun. Unfortunately, a lot of them do need full sun, but there are definitely things that you can grow. Also think about just how much sunlight do you get there? Is it shady most of the day? Is it just shady kind of when you're coming into the building and leaving? Are there maybe periods throughout the day where you are getting a lot of sun? So really just figure out how many hours of sunlight you're getting in that space, and then look for crops that will do well with very low sun if you're not getting much at all. You can also always experiment too. Make it an experiment with the students and just plant things and see how they'll do. If you don't have a garden yet and you don't know if it's a good idea to put one in because of the shade, you can start with just containers just to kind of experiment and see how well things will grow. Michelle asked, she said there's a big blacktop space at her garden. Is there a way to plant on blacktops? So there definitely is. It's going to require a little more work, but we can put beds. You can put raised beds on blacktop. You usually probably will want double high, so you have enough soil there. You could also do container gardening. So you can experiment, but you will want to think about how much root space those crops will need. So if you're on blacktop and you're putting just a single high bed, you're not going to want to grow something that's going to need a lot of root space. So obviously something like sweet potatoes, you'd want to double high, or you just wouldn't want to grow something like that. But you can definitely install them on top of blacktops. You'll need to water them more. So just think about, like, if you're doing container gardening, how that will affect it. But yeah, you can do that. Someone asked if they could have this PDF emailed or a link. Are you talking about the presentation, or are you talking about the sheet I had talked about with the regional crops? Let me get back to that. As far as emailing, I can probably do that. Again, this is only my second Zoom webinar. Okay, presentation. So I will look into how you can send it to all of the participants. Otherwise, again, you can email me and I will send it to you. If you email, I would suggest using either my email, which I'll go back to, or you can also send it to education@gatewaygreening.com or org, I'm sorry. I'll go ahead and put my email in here. Someone asked if we sell native wildflowers. We don't really do a lot of that. Typically, we do a plant sale every year. So we'll do small shrubs we'll do shrubs, very small perennials, trees, different things like that are all donated to us from local nurseries. Because of the pandemic, we're not doing that. But once we are open back to the public, we will do a spring plant sale. So, and we sell them for very cheap. And a lot of times there will be quite a few natives in that. but we don't typically do a whole lot. We definitely encourage growing natives. We just focus a little more on the veggie crops. Go wild, go native. I'm trying to think now. Is a good one to go to for native plants. You know, they do at Shaw Nature Reserve, they do a yearly native sale. Someone suggested Prairie. I've heard of them also. So there are, you can Google, there are a lot of places in the area that do stuff with natives. Yeah, if anyone has any other good resources for that, feel free to drop them in the chat. Okay, so it looks like Brett posted in the chat box a link from Prairie and said there's a grant for them that's open till March 15th. So if you want some natives, go check out that grant. Forest Relief too, yeah, they definitely have native stuff. I'm gonna switch over to the Q&A because I see some folks ask questions in both boxes. Give me just a minute and I'll come back. Sorry, all my computers a little slow today. So for some reason, it's not letting me open the Q&A. If you had a question in Q&A, can drop it in the chat. That would be useful. So I don't know why it's not allowing me to open it, but I see that there are 5 comments. So please, if you put a question in the Q&A section, if you could put it into the chat. Someone asked what happens to school gardens during the summer. Do school communities try and use the gardens as many months out of the year as possible, or are they mostly dormant until school starts? That very much depends on the school. I think most schools like to plant summer crops and hope that they will be able to harvest them when the students come back, because usually a lot of that stuff is still producing, you know, in August when students are back. But again, like I talked about maintenance plan, if you're going to do that, make sure you have a maintenance plan. I know, yeah, you want to make sure that someone's maintaining it, and you don't want it to become kind of a problem for the school district. You know, if they hire out as far as landscaping, you don't want to plant a bunch and then neglect it and it become a wild mess that then someone else has to deal with. And it's also going to be a lot more work for you if you want to start planting in the fall, if you kind of just let your garden go. So I mean, we see very many schools do summer crops, but again, just make sure you have some kind of plan for maintaining, watering, weeding the garden over summer. Otherwise, you will come back to so many weeds and it's going to make your life more difficult. You can also make them dormant. So yeah, if you don't want to do that, if you don't have that maintenance help over the summer, that it's a great idea to just cover your beds. You can just get some bed covering, you can put cardboard down and then put like a black shade covering over it, hold that down however you want with like the lawn staples or rocks on the corners, and that will help to slow down, keep out most weeds from growing. That way you won't have to deal with all that when you come back in the fall. Ooh, someone asked, how much would it cost to build a sustainable garden? That's a difficult question because there's a lot into that. So it depends really how big you would want the garden to be. And when you say sustainable, what do you mean by that? Because I'm thinking it was sustainability as far as, are you thinking more like growing perennials, things like that, kind of having like, what exactly are you thinking when you're saying sustainable? We'll give you a minute if you want to come back to that. But really it depends. I mean, like I said, with our garden development process, or if you're thinking sustainable as far as providing enough food for the family, it really depends what you mean by that. With our garden development process, once you go through it, again, we award up to $1,000 in garden materials. So a lot of times, we recommend schools usually start with maybe 4 beds, like maybe a 12 by 4 or 4 by 8. If they're not a large school and they just don't know if they're going to have a lot of support maintaining them. But with the expansion grants, you know, we have school gardens that have 20 beds in them. So over time you can build on that. but you just want to be careful not to go bigger than you can maintain. And think about, if you want it to be sustainable, you really want to think about the future. Yeah, okay, so you mean long-term going garden. Again, that really just depends on your support you have. It can really change, year to year. There can be lots of teacher turnover. Parents that maybe have students at the school that are big helpers with the garden, their students may leave and go on, to middle school or to high school, and then the parents are no longer involved in the garden. So you can start off with a good, strong garden committee that's going to make a long-term sustainable garden, but that can easily change in a few years. So again, that's really kind of based on what you have available. So if you're willing to pay someone, so when you say how much would it cost, if your school or if someone's willing to actually pay someone to be kind of a garden leader there or a garden teacher, then I would say however big you want to make it, whatever they can maintain. Again, I would start small. You don't want to overdo it with that, but it really just depends on your help. So we always suggest having at least 10 people that are on the garden committee. So in order to go through our process, you have to have 10 people that are really committed to being part of the garden committee, to using it, to helping to maintain it. But even then, those people can leave, go on to other jobs. So it's just really hard to say. It really depends on your situation. Someone said, have you had success planting directly in the ground, or is a raised garden the way to go for easier maintenance and soil health? So if you're in St. Louis, we generally recommend using raised beds. There are a lot of contaminants in St. Louis soil, but you can definitely grow straight from the ground. Just have your soil tested if you're going to do that. So there's a lot of lead and other things that's in the soil around here, where if you're going to be eating that, you probably don't want to plant that directly into the soil. So generally we recommend, if you're putting raised beds in, first putting down cardboard. So putting your bed frame, then putting down cardboard, that kind of helps keep the weeds out, and it will deteriorate over time. And then filling that with soil. So depending on how high your bed is, so you want maybe about 8 inches of soil on top of that. You can have less than that too. It really depends how high your bed is. But it's a good idea to probably do raised beds if you're growing in St. Louis, or just have your soil tested first. Any other questions or thoughts or things that you would like to share? If you have resources, feel free to drop them in the chat box. Certain plants that would amend the soil. That's a good question. Definitely things you can do. So like if you're doing, if you're thinking about like removing bad chemicals, that's interesting. But as far as there are definitely things you can plant that will contribute to the nutrients in the soil. When I was talking about cover crops and thinking about crop rotation. Yeah, that's a good question. I know there are also certain fruit, as far as if you're growing straight into the soil, there are, I think most fruit, I'm not an expert at this, but there are fruit, like shrubs, that do not pull up those chemicals. So there are still other things you can grow, like the woody shrubs and trees. And things like berries and apple trees and so on. So maintaining a healthy garden committee for rollover of participants. Someone asked if there are any tips for maintaining a healthy garden committee for rollover of participants. So really, we just recommend constantly doing outreach. So kind of going back every year to your garden plan, looking at, who's still involved, who still wants to be involved, and who's still around for involvement. And if you've lost, a few teachers that were really involved in the garden, or your main garden leaders, then just doing outreach, talking to other staff members. But our process we use is asset-based community development, and it's very much focused on involving the community. So not just your school community, but it's really important to bring in partners. If you have a neighbor that has some carpentry skills and can maybe help out if a bed falls apart, if you have a neighbor that's just home during the summer a lot and doesn't mind, you know, taking a week to help out with the garden or coming over every few days and helping out, that's a good asset. Also look to different organizations in your neighborhood, schools, universities, finding as many partners, churches, anyone you can kind of partner up with and maybe ask them, you know, if you have some people here that can help maintain the garden, then, you know, as a partnership, you can take the produce that's available that week, or, you know, maybe we'll grow some herbs for you if maybe it's a little restaurant down the street. So really focus on the assets you have in your community. And that will help, you know, just constantly revisit that and do community outreach. It's a great thing to set up maybe a booth at parent-teacher meetings where parents can sign up to help with the garden. So don't just think about staff members. Think about parents, volunteers, neighbors, organizations, businesses. Anyone you can involve in your garden is a great idea. And if you have a really large garden that becomes too large, again, maybe there is a little coffee shop down the street that wants to grow some herbs for, you know, or a little cafe. Maybe you can ask them if they want to take one of the beds, and by allowing them to grow some fresh produce in one of the beds, in exchange, they can water all the beds 1 week of the summer. So think about your assets and think about what kind of partnership that you could build with them. So it looks like pretty close to 6 o'clock. And I don't see any more questions right now. So we can go ahead and wrap up. Again, thanks everyone for joining. If you want to learn more about us, go to our website, gatewaygreening.org. You can find the Gateway Greening store, again, by Googling Gateway Greening store or by going to our website. You can also find on our website our Seed to STEM curriculum with different printable lessons. Again, our YouTube page, you can find not just youth gardening lessons and ideas, but also just for like home or community gardeners. There are lots of tips on there. Just check out our Instagram, our Facebook. We have resources all over the place. And feel free to email me again or email education@gatewaygreening.org if you have any other questions.